So let me introduce Sardar Ravinder Singh Taneja ji. Ravinder Singh ji is a graduate from the Simon School of Management at University of Rochester and has worked with multinationals in Singapore, London, and New York, and currently works for a financial services company. He's founder of weekly online colloquium devoted to dialogue around Gurbani that appears on online magazine sikhchick.com. He has served as executive director of Sikh Research Institute and is currently board of directors. He is also editorial board of Khoj Gurbani, an online crowdsourcing platform that provides Sikhs with educational resources. Since 1997, he has lived in Westville, Ohio with his wife Harjeet and his daughter Simran. In his talk today, he is going to share how Shri Guru Granth Sahib's message has shown him the way to negotiate and reconcile the dual process of being and becoming a Sikh. The title of his topic is Being and Becoming a Sikh, A Journey in Consciousness.
Thank you ji. Waheguru ji ka khalsa, Waheguru ji ki fateh. Actually, I was going to ask Veer ji Jarnail Singh कि तुसी मेरा time ले लो, because I was enjoying it so much. But be that as it may, it seems to me that we've been visiting and revisiting concepts this afternoon and this morning, and I'm afraid there will be some repetition, but perhaps from a slightly different perspective. So before I begin, thank you to the sponsors of this event for pulling this off. I think that the message and vision of Guru Nanak of existence being an integrated ik is much needed in today's world, and the fact that we are here contemplating and reflecting on it is a good sign, and as Dr. Ajay Singh said, we perhaps need 1 million of these all over the world. So thank you very much for pulling this off, and thank you for inviting me. I'm very honored to be here. And to those of you who are in the audience, thank you very much for indulging me for the next 25 minutes. I do appreciate it. What I'm going to talk about really is a bit of a personal narrative, but weaved in a framework that hopefully will be familiar to you. And so my aim is really to share with you what I have absorbed from Gurbani as a practicing Sikh in my own small way. And so it's a bit of an account of my spiritual journey, not so much factually, but a little more around how I have understood the play of being and becoming a Sikh. Because spiritual journeys, to me, are like spirals. It's a meandering process. It's not a linear process. And you are basically going round and round through the course of your life, or at least that's been my experience, and you're sort of seeing the same truth over and over again. The truth is always there. And you just see a different perspective of the same truth because such that it's always there. And you just see it differently. And as Jarnail Singh Veer ji said, you have to churn it out. There is an effort. So, which is why I sort of used the title Being and Becoming. And before I carry on with why I chose it, a confession to make here. It's a borrowed title. I borrowed it from Ajay Singh's book, Being and Becoming a Sikh. And I'll tell you why I borrowed it. But I subsequently discovered that Paul Tillich, the Christian theologian, had also used a similar title in reference to Christianity. And the reason he chose this title was sort of appealed to me, because it talks about tension and movement, being and becoming. There is a being a Sikh and there is becoming a Sikh. So I kind of, the notion of an interplay between being and becoming, the fact that there is some tension between the two, appealed to me simply because it seemed to reflect some of what I had gone through my life. And another reason was I felt as if it's not just me that's experiencing all of this. I think a lot of people out there are wrestling and grappling with the same issues, perhaps in the same way. So I wanted to talk about being and becoming and to sort of capture the underlying developmental process of a Sikh, like myself, an ordinary Sikh. I'm no scholar of Sikhi. I've sort of grown up like the rest of you, most of you here, and I'm just listening to Sakhis and Kirtan and some Vyakhya, and then done a little bit of reading on my own, and that's how we've all grown up. So I just think that the process really is a being and becoming. There's this tension that I want to talk about today. So tension, I mean, I also find tension to be somewhat inherent in the human condition. That's what the tension between Haume and Hukum is, to my mind. Because, there's an analogy that the German philosopher Nietzsche used, that man is actually like a rope, except that the two ends of the rope are tied between a Superman and a beast. So he's talking about potentialities. And the problem is that the rope is actually hanging over an abyss. So there is that fatality that can happen. So the point being that human life, and the gurus speak to us in a similar vein. They're talking about human life not as being a place where you've arrived, but it is actually some sort of a way station. It's a dharamsal. You're a work in progress. That's what human life is. And so a work in progress never really stops. So the point of being and becoming, to me at least, is that process, that dialectic that works within each one of us. So that's what I want to really talk about a little bit today. That's my aim today. For me, this process began a few years ago, and I've been sort of trying to develop this, so I'll share that with you. And I'm sure a lot of you have been asked this question in various settings. Are you a Sikh by birth? And I was asked that question innumerable times, and my response normally was, it's an innocuous question, and you generally say yes. I mean, I'm a Sikh by birth. Except that this one time a few years ago, it gave me some pause. And I started to think to myself, and I said, this is quite inadequate, if not misleading, to say that I'm a Sikh by birth. And I sort of thought through it a little bit, and I said, well, okay, so I was born to Sikh parents. It wasn't my choice. I could have been born to Chinese parents, because certainly nobody asked for my consent on whether I wanted to be born in the first place or whether I wanted to be born to Sikh parents. So the fact is, I was born into a Sikh household. Then what? The usual process of conditioning begins, right? I mean, Sikh cultural software, then begins to be loaded into your head, which is how I think we all sort of... So in addition to a biological DNA, you have a cultural DNA that gets slapped on top of you. And that becomes your thought of being a Sikh. I'm a Sikh because I've inherited these beliefs. I've subscribed to these beliefs that have been handed down to me by my parents or by my Malu, my Gurdwara teacher, whatever the case may be. You get the drift of what I'm trying to say. So when I thought about that, I said, this does not make sense. Because if that were the case, why would the gurus constantly be asking us to actually lead a winged existence, to change, to move? They're talking about saying, Gobind milan ki ye teri bariya, avar kaj tere kitna kaam. There's a suggestion here that human life is an opportunity. So something has to be done. It's not just a matter of inheritance. So that's how this process began in my own mind a few years ago. And I began to realize that becoming a Sikh, as opposed to being a Sikh, which I may have inherited from my culture, is actually a conscious choice that you have to make. It's a very conscious choice. So it's the difference, essentially, between acquired belief and authentic faith. It's the difference between inherited, doctrines versus writing your own script, or at least so I feel or felt at the time. And this is the kind of model that I have been developing in my own mind. And it's taken several iterations. It's still a work in progress. And I'm going to share with you a conceptual model, again, borrowed but adapted, on how I have tried to fit this whole dialectic between being and becoming in Sikh parlance. So let's see where we go with it. I mean, let's see how successful we are. How do I get that slide up? Now, some of you might recognize the U shape here. For those of you who are in the world of corporate America or any large institutions, might recognize this. So I want to tell you that I borrowed this. It's called the U curve or theory U, presencing. This came out of a book several years ago that I encountered at my workplace. They made us go through this training. It was called The Fifth Discipline by Peter Singh. And what surprised me was the underlying premise of what they were saying. What they said is that the quality of the results that we create in any kind of social system, or even individually, is a function of the quality of your awareness, attention, or consciousness of the participants, people who are participating in that system. The quality of any outcome depends on the state of your inner awareness. And I found that quite astonishing, because that is what Guru Nanak is trying to really teach us, as we will see, or as I see. There's a guy by the name of Bill O'Brien that I want to quote here. He ran Hanover Insurance for many years, and I worked for a large insurance company. So these companies are always trying to get people to think differently, to become leaders, or so on and so forth. And I quote him. He led many transformational programs, and he said the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. Again, I was struck by what he said, because to me, this seemed straight out of Gurbani. So the fact that the bottom line of what they're saying was, you cannot transform any situation unless you transform your own internal state. So I took that model and I tried to lay it out here in that U. So on the left-hand side, so I've titled it Manmukh to Gurmukh, and Jarnail Singh Ji talked about being a Gurmukh from a Manmukh. This is really a journey. And I think Satpal Singh Veer Ji talked about Surat di Yatra. This is not a physical yatra. This is a journey that is of the consciousness. And that is why you have the U here. So on the left-hand side, you have the private or the personal side. Then you go through the bottom, and then you come out collectively, collaboratively. And on the left, as you see, I have Haume listed there and Hukum, and that's for a reason. Because to me, Haume and Hukum is the rope, really, that is running through us. It's that dance between Haume and Hukum that we need to resolve. So, to me, Haume is your default state. You've acquired it, you've grown with it, that's who you are. You think you're a Sikh because you were born to Sikh parents, inherited some beliefs. So you start there. That's your default state. Now, the thing is, that's what Guru Nanak calls Kur Di Pal. What's going on here when you're talking about, we've talked about Haume. The way I see it is, Haume is a kind of a blind spot that we all develop. And that prevents you from seeing the deeper inner source of where your thinking is coming from. It's like having a spot at the back of your neck. Every time you move your head, it moves with you. So you don't really see anything different. So that's the blind spot that we need to shed light on. Haume. And Guru Nanak, of course, asked that question. Kiv sachiara huye, kiv kure tutte pal. Basic, fundamental question. Haume happens to be that Kur Di Pal. And how do we do this? So what I want to share with you here is that the very first word I have there is jigyasa, which really means questioning or questing. So the first thing that I find, the first thing that we have to do, at least in my experience, is we have to learn the art of questioning. questioning your own beliefs. You have to be able to see your own seeing, because if you don't, you're not going to see that blind spot in you. So that's the very first thing you have to do. We refer to it as, examining your life, watching what you're thinking, seeing your own seeing. We know Socrates, who said an unexamined life is not worth living. Our gurus have said, "Mool na bujjan apna se pashua se torjiyo." So, you have to start, and the way to do that is what in Punjabi we call jigyasa, is this awakening, to begin to question, to begin to ask what we refer to as what are called perennial questions. Who am I? What on earth am I doing here? What is my role here? Because unless you raise these questions, you're not going to make a start in the journey. So that's the first lesson that I have learned from the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, that you have to make a conscious choice to become a Sikh. It's not enough to be a Sikh. How do you do that? Again, you're shifting your awareness and attention. Now, in Gurmat, as far as I can tell, there are two orientations that are available to a person, and they refer to them as Dhaat and Liv. Dhaat is associated with Daturbazi, which is really your daily rat race that we've all talked about. This is outward looking, outward seeing, and Liv is more the inner side of things. So what you have to do, jigyasa, and shifting the focus of your attention inward. Because what happens is Dhaat and Liv, again, both ordained by Vaheguru, they've been given to us according to Gurbani. What happens is Dhaat is out of sync. It is out of kilter with Liv, because you're not seeing the inner side of it. So you have to bring them in sync. How do you do that? I've got the word Suniye. The Japji Sahib's first 6 or 8 pauris, I think, can tell you, in my mind, all that needs to be known. I mean, we talk about the rest of Gurbani being a Vyakhya of Japji Sahib. So it's the quality of your attention, Suniye, that will actually begin to transform you. Now, at first blush, when I began to recognize that, it was hard for me to believe that just listening, Suniye, could do the trick, but it does. So that's the shift you have to do. That's the methodology. And then I've got Atam ki rehat, outside. I will not spend too much time on that. Jarnail Singh Virji talked about parhez, boundaries. That's the inner soil that you have to cultivate. Sab kuch Atam ki rehat, So, and then the 38th pauri of Japji Sahib, Jat Pahara, it gives you the template for that Atam ki rehat. It's there. And you have to start observe your own observation. And what you will find is that the structures will begin to emerge quite automatically. You won't have to make any decisions, they'll just appear to you. And then as you go down that passage, what happens is, where I have presencing, Nanak hukme je bujhe, here is where you begin to see what hukam is all about. So, Babaji says, hukam keha na jaye, and yet he tells us that it is to hukam that you must attune yourself. And that's why we all struggle. Ki bhi hukam kiye. What is hukam? I think the right question might be, what is hukam for me? How does it play in my life? What I would suggest to you is that hukam keha na jaye. What that means is that hukam in its entirety will never reveal itself to you, simply because you have a role to play in creating the future. So I see that as the emergent future, as it is coming. It has a lot of other connotations. So when you reach the bottom of that U-curve, what happens is you begin to see the contours of the future, and you become a participant. It's like going through the eye of the needle. That's what you're doing down there. And then when you emerge on the other side, what happens to an individual, and I'm trying to put all of this in a Sikhi framework, Chardi Kala, you become inspired. What you recognize at that point is that I'm actually not singular. I'm plural. I'm part of a very large network. I'm not just by myself. That recognition begins to dawn to you. And then what is otherwise a humdrum, ordinary life starts to appear extraordinary. You become thankful, gratitude for a free ride. That's what begins to happen to you. And that's when I've got words like Kartarpur and Chardi Kala over here, because I was also, and I haven't finished this yet, but I wanted to actually map out Guru Nanak's life according to this U curve, because he questioned every tradition that he inherited. Then we know the Sakhi about him spending 3 days in the river Beni, which to me was the stream of his own consciousness, and then his declaration of his mission, "Haun tadi vekar kare laya." That's very clear. He absolutely states what his mission is. And then Chardi Kala and then Kartarpur, which is prototyping. We are taught prototyping in businesses. You sort of want to do something quickly, get a prototype out there, and then institutionalizing that path. So are we running out of time already? Okay, I thought we had just begun to, but okay. So you see where I'm going with all of this. So it changes the way that you operate. So to me, Haume is what is the thing in you that immediately creates others as objects, and you become the subject and the center of the world. So essentially what happens there, the transformation that is happening, is that you don't see the world as disparate objects. You begin to see the world in terms of patterns and interrelationships of which you are a part. And then you begin to do everything in your life very differently. Then you don't have the so-called karta bhav, that I am doing something. Then you become relentless because you're in the service of a larger purpose, and that purpose begins to manifest itself to you. So that is basically what I wanted to track today for you, because that is the back and forth that I have felt in my life. I started out with some very traditional, my blush with Sikhi was in Delhi when I was a young boy. And I didn't know this then, but it was to, the group that I got involved with was of Nirmala antecedents. And so I picked up a very traditional, very devotional kind of Sikhi as a kid. And then I landed up here as a young student many, many years ago. And then what happens is, my schooling was actually acculturalizing me to another sort of thinking. I often say that I have two ancestries. One is the very Sikh, and the other, or Indian, if you want to call it that, and the other is my intellectual ancestry happens to be Western as well, because we were all products of the hangover of the colonial Raj, where parents thought we had to go to schools that advocated sort of teaching in English and so on. So one questioning the other. I went through a period of discarding everything I had learned. And then I came back to it. And that process continues on. And it's deeper and deeper, and it's more engaging. So I just wanted to share this with you. This is kind of personal. But I think that's how I see the process, and I'm sure a lot of you see it that way. I've just borrowed a conceptual framework to just this is really trying to educate myself. With that, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Thank you, Ravinder Ji, Thank you, Ravinder Ji, for sharing with us very interesting and unique perspective on becoming a Sikh with Guru's guidance and showing a unique model and path for journey from Manmukh to Gurmukh. I have some questions here. I'll start with the first question is, how can one measure or know where does one stand on the U model for the journey that you projected?
How does one measure that?
How can one measure or know where does one stand on?
I think that is part of the problem that we have, is that we are so accustomed to measuring everything because we don't understand things unless they are measured or weighed or and relational to one another. I would suggest to you that in the giving up of this mode of thinking that we talked about, the sort of intellectual mode of knowing, there different domains require different methodologies to actually solve problems. So I know Uncle Ranveer Singh is sitting here, and For about 20 years, I've been quarreling with him, but he's mellowed out a little bit lately. He nods his head now when I say something, and he says, "Yep, that's right." But you know, we've talked about this. The question and the problem being defined has its own methodology in it. It emerges from there. That's also the scientific method. I know Ajay Singh here is a scientist. He and I talk a lot about it. And I've been influenced by both of these people, by the way, so a lot, more than even I know. But I think that in this particular journey, those measurements don't apply. I think you're actually, I believe that there are different modes of knowing reality. The intellectual mode is not the only way. You can grasp surface things, and it's okay to use measurement when you want to solve a day-to-day problem. I mean, I work in a business, so you want to schedule a fleet of buses. I mean, you know, you can use game theory and optimization and measure things. But for big decisions like this, or a big journey like this, that doesn't work. So you have to trust, you have to have faith in the Guru.
Thanks. And next question. This journey seems like a lot of work. Aren't people who are stuck at home fortunate? Most of them command a lot of power. Most of them make life difficult for others. They are totally unaware of how much pain they are to the rest of the world.
I'm sorry, I hope I'm not a pain to the rest of you.
It's just more of a comment than a question. So.
What
the
is
question is, this journey seems like a lot of work. Aren't people
yes, it is. It is a lot of work.
Fortunate? That's where the question mark is.
Yeah.
And then there's, aren't people who are stuck at home fortunate?
Stuck at home?
Home.
In Haume?
Yes.
We're all stuck in Haume. So what is the question? People who are stuck in Haume? Or is the journey... I'm not sure.
That's the question. And then this comment, most of them command a lot of power, and most of them make life difficult for others at the same time. So can you elaborate?
Yes.
Whoever has the...
So it is me.
Yes.
So, you know, it's a lot of work. You know, all we are listening today is making me feel like, you know, where do I stand? I'm nowhere kind of thing. And at that same time, there are people who are so ignorant, who know nothing about this. And they're happy-go-lucky people. And so, I mean, I think it's not a work getting to know all this. This conference is making a lot more work. So aren't those people happy?
Amarpal Singh is sitting here when we were walking into this hall after Langar. He asked me, "Tusi busy? Aajkal busy ho?" मैं कहा नहीं. He says, "की मतलब?" मैं कहा नहीं. ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕੰਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਮੈਂ ਕਰਨਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕਿਹਾ ਗਿਆ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਨਾ ਤੇ ਬਿਜ਼ੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਦੀ ਬਿਜ਼ੀ ਹੋਏ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਵਿਹਲੇ ਹਾਂ ਸੋ ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਇਟਸ ਆਲ ਇਨ ਹਾਊ ਯੂ ਥਿੰਕ ਓਕੇ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਇਹ ਮਨ ਦੀ ਮਨੌਤ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜੀ ਮੈਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਬਿਜ਼ੀ ਹਾਂ ਬੜਾ ਹੀ ਕੰਮ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਫਿਰ ਇੰਝ ਟੁਰਨ ਲੱਗ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਬੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਜੀ ਬੜਾ ਔਖਾ ਹੈ ਕੰਮ ਸੋ ਮੈਂ ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਵਿਹਲੇ ਹਾਂ ਸੋ ਯੂ ਨੋ ਇਟਸ ਆਲ ਇਨ ਦੀ ਐਟੀਟਿਊਡ ਬੇਸਿਕਲੀ
So there's another question here. Let me try to interpret that. It says...
बड़े औखे सवाल ने
हाँ जी औखे सवाल हैं हुक्म is
है जी
says Hukam is Amrit for all Sikhs. That would take you from Manmukh to Gurmukh. Then there's another question mark. Is answer joining a family the Khalsa?
Is the answer joining the family?
So joining a family, the Khalsa, is that the one which takes you from Manmukh to Gurmukh?
So, you know, I just told you a minute ago that Dr. Ajay Singh, who's sitting there, I regard him as a mentor. And one of the things that I've learned from him is never to give a straight answer. So frankly, I don't have the answer.
What a compliment, sir.
So whether you want to become a Khalsa or not are things that you have to deal within yourself. To my mind, ਸਾਡੇ ਧਾਰਮਿਕ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨਾ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡਾ ਰਫੜ ਕੀ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਕੁ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਅਨੁਭਵ ਹੈ ਉੱਥੋਂ ਤਾਂ ਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੂਜੇ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਆਪਣੀ ਮਤ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਬਖਸ਼ਣੀ। I think we should stop doing that. Worry about yourself. ਇੱਥੇ ਹੀ ਬੜੇ ਪੁਆੜੇ ਨੇ। ਮੈਨੂੰ ਗੱਲ ਯਾਦ ਆ ਗਈ ਹੈ। I used to play squash. ਮੈਂ ਤਾਂ it relates to this. ਤੇ I had the opportunity to learn from Hashim Khan, who's supposed to be the legend. He died a month ago. ਤੇ ਉਹ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕਹਿਣ ਲੱਗਾ ਕਿ when I went for my first squash lessons, right? ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਕੋਚ ਨੂੰ ਇੰਪ੍ਰੈਸ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਸਾਂ। ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਬੜੀ ਲੰਮੀ ਦਾੜੀ ਸੀ ਉਹਦੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਪਿਸ਼ਾਵਰ ਕਿਧਰੇ। And he said, let me show how fast I can run. ਤੇ ਉਹ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਰਨ ਦੀ ਫਿਕਰ ਨਾ ਅਜੇ ਕਰ, there's enough problems with you standing in one place. So that's how it is.
Let's do a Jakara. Bole So Nihal. Sat Sri Akal.